after you've done that for a while, try to alternate. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And you're striving for a nice clean. Allow your pick to glide over the strings. Don't be too rigid. You know, just let it, just try to relax that right hand a little bit. Don't observe yourself getting stiff at times, and just relax and just let the pick have some give to it. And occasionally you may drop the pick. That's all right. I do that all the time. But you're trying to get a nice glide. Also strive for hitting the correct bass note. And now we're going to do the same exercise up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. See, we're practicing several things at once now. Trying to stay in tune. 6, 4. Now we're going to go back to our sort of Celtic strum where we went down. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. So go ahead and work on these things. Go back, shut off the DVD, and spend some time. Spend the next few days working on just these concepts. Get them under your belt. Get them under your fingers. Get them in your heart and mind. Okay, I could just live in this key all day long. Again, it's hard for me to leave the key of E because it just has so many things about it that I love, just the fullness of it. So before we move on from the key of E, let's look at a few other unique things to the key, things that we can take advantage of. We have our basic E here. Now if we move it up, see that voicing? We keep the E in the bass, so we have the E, and then we slide that up and use our index finger. And then we slide that whole shape up again. It's a great thing about guitars is that we can lock into a shape and just move that shape around. So it's E, there's a shape, move it up, and then we do like an E here, and then move it up 2 more frets. You can keep on going, but it's not used as often. But just that, you know, just again, another thing that we can hang on, allows us to be freed up to sing. Okay, or like an offering. I bring an offering to you. To you, my King, I bring an offering. I bring an offering to you. And sometimes I'll end songs with, here's an E, and we'll play an E2. I want us to start, let me just put a capo on, and that puts us in the key of F, which is really the key that offering was written in. I bring an offering to you, my King. Now here's a consideration when we capo, is always be aware that when you capo, it could alter the tuning ever so slightly on your guitar. That's why having a good visual tuner is helpful. So in the middle of a song, if I have to capo up, sometimes I'm aware that, and you have to get to know your guitar, I'm aware that on this particular guitar, that sometimes the B string will be a little bit sharper once I capo than it was when it was completely open. So it's a very subtle thing, but sometimes you just want to be aware of that. And at times I've actually made a slight little adjustment, or I'll quickly turn on the tuner, I'll step on that and I'll just make that slight adjustment visually. I bring an offering to you. And I just make sure. So get to know your guitar. Get to know the idiosyncrasies of your particular guitar, okay? And capo the 3rd fret. Sometimes the 3rd fret will make the low E a little bit sharp. and you have to make these tiny little adjustments. So pay attention to that. Now let's go back to the key of E. Let's look at a few of the peculiar things about E that we can do. This is an E, and by moving this pinky out, just drop your wrist a little bit. You get this nice E add 9 kind of thing. It's just a beautiful, mellow chord. And that's an E add 9. So you know, like if we're going to do an E sus, you could do that for an E sus if you want, or you can just do the standard E sus. Let's look at what we call an E5. Okay, that's an E5 is implying that there's no third, and the third of a chord is what tells you if it's major or minor. So without this, that's the third. So we take that out and look at this voicing. So there's our E5. There's no third there, and it's very. You can play that or play this one up here. It's a nice and very Celtic, very open sounding, okay? And then we have like an E6. You can just, you can always send them. It's one way to play E6. Then you have your E major 7, which a lot of times you can do that, or you can just slide up. I prefer this one. It's like E, and then it's basically an E major 7 sound. Kind of has a sneaking a 9 in there too. All right, let's look at some of these other keys and look at what makes some of these other guitar keys unique and peculiar. Let's look for things that are unique to each key, like the key of D, the key of C, key of A, key of E, key of G. Those are our primary guitar keys. So let's look and see what are some things in the key of D when we're in D. How can we take advantage of this particular voicing? Because unlike the E, where we can take advantage of all these extra strings, D, we're limited to kind of these upper 4 chords, or upper 4 strings, unless we were to drop the D. But for the most part, we're kind of limited to these 4 strings. So, and while we do that, I also want us to begin looking at the variety of chords in the key of D as all related. Instead of looking at a D6 or a D major 7 and a D add 9, looking at them as separate finger blobs, like when you buy one of those guitar chord encyclopedias, and there's just thousands of finger blobs, and it's so intimidating. And you think, man, how can I ever memorize all these? I want us to start looking at all those chords as just slight alterations of the basic chord that we all know. So starting with the key of D, we all know sort of the basic D chord. So let's go through the options. So a D2 chord, you've all heard of and you've seen a D2. So just by taking off the middle finger, that gives us the D2 sound. And let's go back to a regular D. And listen to what the 2 sounds like, D2. Very, very nice sound. Real open. Back to a regular D. Now let's go to a D sus 4. See, all we do is alter it by putting our pinky there. There's our D sus, or sometimes D4. Now let's extend our pinky up a little more, and that would be a D5, meaning that we're playing roots and fifths, but there's no third in the chord. And again, very nice Celtic sound. Yeah. As we lift up your name, let your fire fall. Hail the power of Jesus' name. So I like that sound. That's a D5, and then we have a D6. So there's going back to a D, and how we alter it is just take off that middle finger, or the ring finger. See that? It's a D6. You don't hear that a lot, but So we use that in like in the song Arise. One thing we ask of you, D6. One thing that we desire. So D6 and then a D major 7. Here's our D. And let's get used to just seeing just by taking that note down a half step. There's the root. And we go down to the major 7. There's a D7, D major 7. And then if we go down one more, there's our D7. Sounds like that, what was that song? Kiss me. Sixpence None the Richer. It's a good little exercise. D7 to a D major 7, back up to the D major. So again, let's connect the dots. Let's connect these chords and see that they're not entirely different. They're just slight alterations of the D chord that we all know and love. There's a D, and then here's a thing. You'll see a D add 9 sometimes. And a 9 is the same number as a 2. It's the same note. So when we did the D2, so root, second degree of the scale or the chord, that's an E. But when you go up the scale, root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 or root, and then it 9. So 9 and 2 are the same note, okay? So a D add 9, this is an important distinction because you'll see that a lot. D add 9 or C add 9 or G add 9 versus a G2 or an A2. Here's the difference in a nutshell. A D2 chord implies that you're not playing the third of the chord. You're just playing the root, the second degree of the chord, and the fifth. So it's a real open sound, and you're not defining if it's a major or minor. Now, let's play a D add 9, where you're going to keep the third in there, but you're adding the 9. And it's a little sweeter. You hear that? As opposed to kind of hum that. There's the 2 or the 9. But now we're going to add the third, but keep the 2 right here. That's a little bit sweeter. So just in general, know that an add 9 is a little bit sweeter than just a basic 2 chord because you're keeping the third in there, and the third kind of makes it sweet. Sweet. Okay, let's look at the key of C. Sometimes we're in the key of C and it's not our choice. We just have to play in it. And it can be sort of basic, standard. So what are some things in the key of C that we can take advantage of, okay? For one, we have to think about muting that low E most of the time when we're in the key of C, okay? So I'll just kind of cheat a little bit and see this thumb over here in my left hand. Hello. Hello, I missed the thumb. Instead of having it back here like the proper guitar technique says, let's go ahead and bring it around and just let it lightly touch the low E, okay? So we get that kind of a sound. And so that way when we play a C chord, if we're strumming, we're not going to get all this extra E. So just bring that around, find a way to mute that. Another way would be to just use this ring finger on your left hand and just again, just by gently touching that string, it mutes it. But I like this one better. So there's our C. And let's add, if we're going to do a 2 chord, a C2, we could go. Okay, take off the middle finger there, and you have to make sure it's not my favorite voicing. It's a little muddy. So another thing we could do is here's the 2 right there. So we could, that's a C2, but I'm getting some of that E in there. So we could go ahead and hold down the G, this note right here, and that's a full-on C2 right there. There are no thirds being played. It's just root, second, and fifth. So we went from a basic C chord to a C2. So we just move our fingers a little bit, and again, very open sounding. It doesn't define if it's major or minor. Okay, now let's go back to a C and do a C sus 4. So put our pinky there, and again, I'm going to bring this around because we don't want the low E sounding out. We also don't want the high E sounding out on a sus chord. You know, it's kind of modern sounding though. It's almost kind of cool, but only if you really meant to do it. So typically, you know, we don't want the E to ring out if we're playing a sus. So let's figure out how we can mute this high E string, okay? I'm going to vote for this index finger here to just ever so slightly touch that high E. So practice that. It's ringing out, and then when I go to the sus, I'm going to drop that index finger just so it's not ringing out, okay? So practice that, just going from C to the C sus without letting that high E ring out. Another way I've done it sometimes is if you want to put the G up top, you can. It's a little bit more of a hand contortion, but. Okay, so there's our C4. Let's look at a C5 if we're trying to get more of that Celtic kind of thing. Here's our C chord, and then instead of letting the E ring out, which is the third, we're going to try to put the G on top, which is the fifth of the chord, and we get more of a. The way. There's that sus again, another way to play sus with the 5. But the idea is to be able to maximize the number of strings we're playing so we can get the biggest sound that we can, because many times we're not with a band. We don't have the luxury of carrying a band everywhere with us. So if we're in a Bible study or we're leading worship by ourselves on a Wednesday night, we're trying to get the most sound that we can out of this acoustic guitar and 6 strings. Okay, so that's a C5. You'll use that a lot. Again, just take some time, and this is like an exercise where you just start with a basic chord and then go ahead and alter it and say it out loud. There's the C. There's the C. Add 9. Or there's the C2. Now go back to a C. Okay, C. Now there's a C sus 4. Okay, and then go back to a C. How do I make a C5? Okay, a C5 would be, I'd just add the pinky. Again, just get away from the finger blob mentality and try to see how these chords are all related, and they're just slight alterations of the basic chord. Now let's go to a C6 chord. Not used very often, but. And then C major 7. There's the C. And then C major 7. And then, of course, we know the C7. Reminds me of a Beatles song. Okay, then C major 7, C dominant 7, okay? C. Now here's just for a little extra credit. Sometimes I'll go up here and use a little bar chord. That's a great C2 voicing. It's like an A2, but I'm sliding it up and I'm barring this. We haven't talked about bar chords, but just think of it as there's your A2, and I'm sliding it up. Okay. Again, a movable shape. If I slide it up 2 more frets, it's a D2. I can slide it down and do like a B flat 2. Ouch. That takes a little hurt right there. There's these bar chords, which we'll address a little bit later. But that's that muscle right there. So we have to kind of build up. Okay, key of G. Let's look at what's unique about the key of G. Most of us were taught in our formative years to play G like this. But this whole sort of, it's like a tuba voicing. It's a little fat, it's a little heavy. So to kind of make it a little more lean, we go ahead and, I personally like to just take that finger off and mute the A string. So we accent more of the up here. Or, okay, so just basically play a G like you always have, but try taking off your index finger and muting that A string. We've talked a lot about muting so far. So there's our G. And then let's think about, okay, all of a sudden on a chord chart we see G2. Instead of running to our chord dictionary and going, oh, how do you play G2 again? Just think, okay, I just have to add the 2. So G, there's the G, open G right there, and then there's A. So that's your 9, that's your 2. So go ahead and hum that. Back to a regular G. And again, if we don't want the third, we're gonna have to, when we play it, make sure we're not letting the third of the chord ring out, which would be the B. That makes it sweet. So if we did that, and then added the A, then that's a G add 9. See the difference? So here's a G add 9, and you can use them interchangeably for the most part. Okay, it's not radically different. So here's a G add 9, and if we want a G2, I'm just gonna make sure that I'm not letting that B ring out. I'm gonna go ahead and play the 5th of the chord right there, so it's, and then I add the 2. Can you hear that? Here we go, here's the 2.